a man rescued a baby bobcat and nurtured it. Regrettably, because of challenging life situations, they were forced to separate. After 8 exhausting years, the man re-entered the bobcat's habitat, but the predator's surprising response stunned everyone present. Since he was a child, James Miller had envisioned a career involving wild animals. He was raised on a ranch in Wyoming, where he was consistently around different animals. His parents fostered his passion for nature and frequently brought him on hikes through the nearby wilderness. After completing high school, James registered at the University of Wyoming to pursue wildlife biology. He approached his studies with immense passion, dedicating considerable time to reading and working in labs. Throughout summer breaks, James volunteered at a nearby wildlife rehabilitation center, assisting in the care of animals. Upon finishing his studies, James secured a position as a guide at Yellowstone National Park. He was excited to have the chance to watch wildlife each day. James guided visitors on tours, sharing information about the park's plants and animals. One day, while on a typical tour, James spotted something odd in the distance. In the long grass, he noticed some motion. Requesting the male tourists to remain in the jeep, James cautiously approached what he found, which amazed him. It was a small bobcat cub, abandoned by its mother. James scanned the area for any adult bobcats, but found none. The cub was by itself and appeared quite frail and starving. James realized that it could not endure without assistance. Without a second thought, he chose to rescue the small child. Softly enclosing the cub in his jacket, James went back to the jeep with the tourists. He outlined the scenario and requested that they remain composed. The group comprehended the situation and even assisted in making the small traveler more comfortable. Upon arriving back at the visitor center, James promptly reached out to the park's veterinary service. The veterinarians assessed the cub and determined that it was critically malnourished and dehydrated. They decided to move it to the closest wildlife rehabilitation center. James offered to go with the cub to the facility. As they traveled, he embraced him, attempting to soothe him. The cub felt afraid, but slowly began to trust James. He called him Max, influenced by a cherished book from his youth. At the rehab facility, Max was assigned to a unique area for young carnivores. James requested approval to remain and assist with his adjustment. The center's administration, impressed by his dedication and expertise, consented. The initial days were particularly challenging. Max was fearful of his new environment and declined to eat. James devoted nearly all his time to him, patiently attempting to earn his trust. He nourished him using a bottle filled with a unique formula that resembled the composition of bobcat milk. Slowly, Max began to become familiar with James. He let him stroke him and joyfully frolicked with him. James was thrilled to witness the cub growing more lively and inquisitive. He chatted with him, shared tales, and even sang gentle melodies to calm him. Weeks went by, and Max developed. He increased in both weight and strength. James instructed him on all that a young bobcat needs to learn: how to scale, how to sneak, and how to leap. He utilized toys and specialized trainers to enhance his abilities. James realized that he couldn't be Max's sole caregiver all the time. He began slowly familiarizing him with other employees at the center. This was challenging. Max felt envious and wanted to keep everyone away from him besides James. When Max reached 6 months of age, he was transferred to a bigger enclosure that allowed him to move around more and discover his environment. James kept visiting him daily, but now aimed to grant him greater independence. The center housed additional bobcats, and James gradually started to introduce Max to them. Initially, he feared his fellow bobcats, but as time went on, he grew curious about them. He especially adored a young female bobcat called Luna. Days became months, and months transformed into years. Max developed into a robust and nimble adult bobcat. His fur turned glossy and smooth, and his look became assured and keen. James felt a sense of pride in the bobcat he had transformed into. Even though Max didn't require constant care anymore, the connection between him and James stayed incredibly strong. Whenever he arrived at his enclosure, Max welcomed him happily. He let James stroke him and occasionally played with him, just as he did when he was younger. James persisted in his role at the center, now as a specialist in large predators. He took part in multiple research initiatives and wildlife preservation efforts. Max's tale motivated him to pursue new objectives. One day, James got a distressing call from his mother. His father had fallen gravely ill and required constant attention. James realized he needed to return home, but the idea of leaving Max shattered his heart. James took a considerable amount of time to explain to Max that he had to go. Certainly, the bobcat was unable to grasp the words, yet it appeared as if he sensed his sorrow. On the final day prior to his departure, James devoted several hours to being with Max, simply sitting beside him and observing the sunset. When he departed, James wished he could come back in a few months. He coordinated with his coworkers to have them send him pictures and videos of Max. James thought their connection would endure the distance, yet life frequently unfolds unexpectedly. His father's situation ended up being more severe than first believed. He needed continuous assistance, and James couldn't abandon his parents in that circumstance. Days transformed into weeks, weeks became months, and months evolved into years. James attempted to maintain contact with the center, but it grew harder each day. Being a nurse and looking after his father consumed all his time and energy. In the middle, Max struggled to cope with the separation. Initially, he persistently looked for James, walking around his enclosure and paying attention to every noise. When he failed to show up, Max grew anxious and annoyed. The center staff attempted to soothe Max. They provided him with his favorite toys and organized additional activities, yet Max stayed uninterested in everything. He spent hours in the distant corner of his pen, fixated on one spot. Slowly, Max's conduct started to alter. He began barking at the caretakers and rejecting food. The veterinarians were concerned about his health. Max had clearly lost weight, and his fur had turned lackluster. The management of the center sought a remedy. They brought in an animal behavior specialist to assist Max in adapting, yet all attempts proved futile. The bobcat was not interested in speaking with anyone. In the meantime, James persisted in looking after his father. His state would get better, then decline once more. At times, it appeared as though he was improving, but then another crisis would arise. Even though he was occupied, James continuously thought about Max. He held onto his photos and frequently viewed videos of him at night. He envisioned strolling through the center with him once more. Time went by, and James's father gradually started to get better. The physicians discussed favorable advancement. James started to consider going back to the center, but feared that Max might not recognize him anymore. At last, after 8 prolonged years, James's father's situation had improved enough that he didn't require ongoing assistance anymore. James understood that it was time to go back. He reached out to the center and notified them of his return. His coworkers were pleased to hear from him, but cautioned that Max had transformed significantly over the years. They warned him to be careful when encountering him. On the day he came back, James felt more anxious than before. He remained for a considerable time at the main entrance, summoning his bravery. Upon his arrival, he was welcomed by longtime friends and associates. James promptly made his way to Max's habitat. From afar, he observed him, an elegant and strong bobcat, sitting on a tree limb, staring into the horizon. James experienced his heart constrict with anticipation. The caretaker unlocked the enclosure door, and James carefully entered. Max remained still, seemingly unaware of his presence. James gradually drew near, softly uttering his name. Abruptly, Max swiveled his head and gazed directly at James. His eyes reflected astonishment and incredulity. He gradually descended and moved a short distance toward James. James stood still, uncertain of what to anticipate. Max approached nearer, intently observing him. He inhaled deeply, as if attempting to detect a known aroma. James remained motionless, hardly inhaling, when suddenly, Max emitted a soft growl and jumped at James. However, instead of launching an attack, he merely rested his paws on James's shoulders, just as he had done in his youth. James embraced him, pressing his face into his fluffy coat. Tears ran down his face as he petted Max. "I missed you dearly, my boy," he murmured. The bobcat softly purred back, almost as if to express that he missed him as well. The center personnel observed in astonishment. Nobody anticipated Max to respond this way after all those years apart. It was a genuine miracle. From that moment forward, Max appeared to regain his vitality. He once more took an interest in his surroundings, joyfully engaged with the caretakers, and resumed socializing with the other bobcats. He particularly bonded with Luna, the same bobcat he had admired in his younger years. James felt glad to find that Max was no longer by himself. James went back to his job at the center. He now looked after not just Max, but also various other animals. Nevertheless, the bobcat consistently held a unique place in his heart. The remarkable connection shared by James and Max, enduring through years of distance and challenges, symbolized loyalty and dedication, serving as a reminder that genuine friendship transcends species barriers and can conquer any difficulties.